Hey, welcome everybody to our devotional. Yesterday we began a little brief series looking at the life of that character in the Old Testament by the name of Samson. He's almost bigger than life, isn't he? So we talked yesterday about how this relationship with Delilah was kind of the beginning point, or it certainly sped up the downward spiral in Samson's life. And we're looking at his life because we're trying to learn lessons, things that we can take away from mistakes that he made so that we don't have to make those same mistakes. And so we left it yesterday where Samson finally divulges the secret to his great strength to Delilah. She kept nagging him. And so it was in his hair. And they cut his hair. And there he is, and he doesn't realize, and this is kind of the sad verse that encapsulates this downward spiral, and that is in verse 20 of Judges chapter 16, where it says, he didn't know, Samson didn't know, he didn't realize the Lord had left him. So, I want to pick the story up in verse 21. And if you're there in Judges chapter 16, I just want to read one verse with you, and then we're going to look at a couple of verses in the New Testament real quickly. Verse 21. So, the Philistines seized him, Samson. It's really graphic. They gouged out his eyes, and they took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding grain in the prison. I'm a visual person. So in my mind's eye, I see Samson, this once incredibly powerful man, vibrant man. And now his hair has been cut, power is gone. They gouge his eyes out. He's no threat to them any longer. And what they've turned him into is a human mule. He's pulling the grinder, grinding the grain. It's an amazing downfall, isn't it? Now, what can we learn from his life? Well, let me take you to two passages in the New Testament real quickly. Turn over to James chapter 1, and we're going to tie this all together. Hang with me. It will tie together. In James chapter 1, the writer is talking to us about, among other things, how sin really works. And it starts with temptation. So if you're there, pick it up at verse 14, okay? James chapter 1, verse 14. But each person is tempted. He's showing us what happens on the inside of us when temptation comes into our lives. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Notice that. It's a total inside job. Your own evil desire, and then you're enticed. Now watch at verse 15. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Now real quickly, it's intriguing what James tells us here. He says, you're being tempted. Keep in mind, you haven't sinned because you're tempted. But if you, like Samson, keep allowing yourself, keep placing yourself in the middle of temptation, what's going to happen is your own evil desires are going to lead you away. And after a while, that temptation will give birth to sin. And sin, when it grows up, according to James, gives birth to death. The ultimate bad stuff in our lives. So, did you follow that? Temptation, you haven't sinned, but you need to get out. Samson didn't do that. He stayed with Delilah. Temptation eventually gave birth to sin. He does wrong. And then sin, when you stay in it, ultimately grows up and brings death and destruction. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit. I want to be helpful to you and to me, learning something about ourselves and how to deal with temptation, that struggle, and how to keep it from giving birth to sin in our lives. Does that make sense? That's what we want to try to do in the next couple of moments. Again, remembering what happened to Samson and just visualizing this man who went through this downward spiral, and now he's powerless, his eyes are gouged out, and he is grinding. He's pulling a grinder around. So, here are 4 words that I think can be helpful to us. Number 1, sin will find us. It's going to find us. We could talk a long time about this, but maybe you're a mom or a dad. It doesn't really matter. You need to hear this. We carry around our phones. They're almost an appendage to our bodies. Think about how much sin can come through that electronic device, that cell phone that you have, moms and dads, that your kids have. You don't have to go looking for sin. It's looking for you. Temptation is around us everywhere. You and I know that. Sin's looking for us. Understand, here's our second word, that sin will blind you and me. Literally, to Samson, sin ultimately led to the loss of his eyes. And to me, that's so metaphorical of what happens to us when we play around with temptation like Samson did. We stay in it long enough that it gives birth, according to James, to sin. And what does it do? It turns around and it blinds us. It causes us to lose our moral compass. It causes us to lose our vision. I mean, how did Samson end up the way he did? It didn't happen overnight. It was a blinding process that sin does in all of our lives. Here's the third word. Sin will bind you. We think, Samson thought this, we think that often what is tempting us, if we'll just go down that road, and eventually it leads to sin, we think it's a road to freedom. I know, because I've traveled that road, and I suspect you have as well. You ask any person who is struggling with addiction, and they will tell you, hey, when we first started, we thought, man, this is freedom. This is awesome. What they didn't realize was that road was not leading to freedom. It was leading to bondage. That's true of sin. Sin will bind you. And finally, the fourth word, sin will grind you. There's Samson. He's a human mule, grinding the grain. And that's what sin does in our lives. What a graphic image. It takes you from being a person with a purpose, a mission in life, joy, health, and it takes you down a road. It just grinds you up. That's why James says, hey, listen, temptation, if you play around with it long enough, will lead to sin. And sin, when it stays in your life, it's growing up. And ultimately, it leads to death. And that's just a Bible word for destruction. It destroys our lives. It destroys relationships. And again, so many of us know that because we've experienced that. So, here's the deal. Let's learn lessons. Let's learn from Samson. Let's change course if we need to. Let's encourage our kids and other people in the same direction. Let me give you those 4 words again real quickly. Sin will find you, sin will blind you, sin will bind you, and sin will grind you. And I leave you with this last line. It blew my mind when I read it. Simple, but man, is it powerful. Sin will always take us further than we want to go. Listen, I hope this encourages you. We're learning some tough lessons, but I hope it encourages you. There's a battle going on, but you and I, through the help of God, can win the battle. Have a good day. See you tomorrow.